It's time to put the death back in Death Guard. By which I mean, I guess I've started another army. Cutesy Nurgle folk is fine if that's your scene, but it's not for me. Brother Kirut, for example, is a perfectly normal plague marine, but he does have a touch of the old parasitic ghoul where his lungs should be syndrome. Said biological hitchhiker was sourced from the top half of a poxwalker, arguably the best half of a poxwalker. His knife hand did, however, meet the same fate as his legs. After a short course of back shaving, the two torsos came together in very much the same way you pack a parachute, with glue, gaps and the head of an Age of Sigmar crypt ghoul. That ghoul sprue had some pretty gnarly arms too, so let's chalk up an early win for friend of the channel, laziness. With any sort of kitbash like this, there's the inevitability of significant gap filling. Thankfully, with this Nurgle business, you've got quite a lot of scope to hide any deficiencies in the old sculpting prowess amongst all the lumpy pox stuff. My approach is to spend a bit of time forming the basic shape and then, well, not really overthinking the detailing. It all just sort of works out. Kirut needs arms, and I chose this slung bolter with its passive pose to help draw the eye to his pectoral pal, which is, let's be fair, the literal centrepiece of the model. On the other side, the regular plague knife went on an unpaid internship in the bits box and was replaced with a plague bearer one because I like triangles and you should too. As the old proverb suggests, 4 heads makes the heart grow fonder, so to make up the numbers I upcycled this delightful triple header from the less than delightfully named Warhammer Quest Cankerborn. Onto the power pack, and I decided I wanted a bit more bulk at the top of the model to help frame the rib dweller. And these dead animal bits from Pete the Wargamer were, I want a better pun than rammed. There's got to be something better than rammed. Not horned though, I'm not touching that. By the way, I'm Chris, this is Offbeat Builds, and I really didn't feel like tidying up my workbench before I filmed this. Anyway, I finished out the model with a couple of skulls and a bit of jewellery chain that I really think ties the room together. Tidy. Now, all that rib business reminded me of something that I've wanted to do for a while. The baffling but accurately named art of skeletonception. Vermouth, as his name doesn't suggest, is 50% Nurgle rot sword, so according to the customs of back alley mathematics, I've come armed with a razor saw. To perch atop those delightful pegs, I have devised a skeleton within skeleton situation. Pete's deceased mammal ephemera provided what can only be described as big ribs, just the kind that you pin into the figurative tailbone of the rot sword. For the innie, I used a Warlord Games skeleton. Now, this kit is much maligned for being nightmarish to build, but in my opinion it's the best source of nicely proportioned bones to combine with non-skeleton models. With the innie nested snugly in his eternal rot suit, I attempted to attach the skull, which was, amusing I suppose. Anyhow, with little going on up top, I decided to rough in some support for the Plague Marine's head and arms, deciding I'd worry about the details later. This is something I do quite a lot when I'm in uncharted waters on a kitbash, as I find it's best not to commit too much until all the major pieces are in play. That was bordering on genuine advice, so to offset that, here's me sticking some ludicrous spikes on a power pack. I believe these were from the Demon Prince kit. As it turned out, I didn't have long before I did need to commit, and rather predictably the crime in question was unlicensed sculptitude, which, if I'm reading correctly, carries a mandatory minimum sentence of... So, I think this is technically a biomech, something that I only mention in lieu of anything more poignant, informative, or dare I say, interesting. Anyway, here's a big lad. My Warhammer quest involves making use of as many of the Dark Water models I can before the prices on eBay get out of hand. As such, Morgoth the Cleaver was pressed into service as my Lord of Virulence. Nominative determinism fans should look away now, as Morgoth, well, he's getting cleaved. The disarming left the kind of void that can only be filled with middle-class consumerism, which is to say, I stuffed Morgoth's cavity with as much aluminium as I could steal from a much more successful person's kitchen. Then, predictably, green stuff. Less predictably is this tentacle arm from the Puscoil Blightlord's kit that I've been saving for just such a project. As for the shoulder pads, these Skaven Rat Ogre numbers look like they were designed to fit there, which, as a wise man once said, is totally Mexico. On the other hand, there's no hand, because this old Demon Prince jump pack nub thing is getting turned into a twin-linked Plague Spewer arm, obviously. After ablating the unnecessary vents, this assortment of jewellery bits combined to make a pair of nozzles. These were to be integrated into what you might describe as the hand, using the combined power of holes and glue. Scintillating stuff. To emphasise that this is in fact a wrist, I gave Lord Gorrit a bracelet made from some model ship rigging cured, secured in place with a dab of thin superglue in lieu of a real knot, because my 1/56 scale sailor skills they're somewhat lacking. Following the rope trick, the newly minted arm gun was located shoulder adjacent, leaving a bit of a gap to fill, or in this case, conceal with another of those Rat Ogre armour plates. I wanted to echo the shape of the Chaos Power Pack, and after perusing the Abyss, these Bloodthirster horns seemed to fit the bill. I'll blend them in later, we don't need another green stuff montage. My chosen head from a rot sword needed a ball-bearing neck since the model didn't really have one, and the head moulding was suspiciously dome-shaped on the rear. All that was left to do was add a light sprinkling of green stuff and a nice copper hose, which I'll show you how to make a bit later in the video. Does Gorrit read as a Lord of Virulence? Not really. Does it matter? Not even slightly. For grimdark weirdness, parasites have got your back, or in this case the whole torso, borrowed from one of these Dungeons & Lasers worm things. Our pestilent pal's legs are once again from the AOS Rot Swords box, but this one needed a belt. And as this is more structural than decorative, I went for some styrene tube, which gave something approximating a decent mounting point for the worm-maw torso. As with the other builds, I used some green stuff to bulk out the basic shapes before kicking off the limb party. Any old Space Marine arm would do for this Power Fist setup, so I plundered my near endless resource of intercessor parts, safe in the knowledge that power armoured upper arms are basically invisible, especially when paired with a Power Fist. The other side got a bolter, which is honestly pretty boring, as is the addition of shoulder pads. He does have some fun chest tentacles though, 2 words that I utterly refuse to spoonerise. Anyway, time to reprise the old steel ball bearing and rot sword head trick from earlier, because I have a passion for top-heavy models. Moving south, I thought this detail from the rot sword's shield strap would make an excellent belt buckle, and well, it did. As we're deep into the video, green stuff time has been shortened to make space for some exciting power pack action, but that's all a mere precursor for some wonderful shots of my thumbs as I struggle to film the delicate art of turning jewellery supplies into a delightful belt situation. This was secured with a dab of thin CA glue and complemented with a bit of rigging cord and a skull to vary the texture and add interest to the lower half of the model. I had convinced myself that the long torso would make him look more mutated and weird, but I think it just looks like he's got baby legs. Oh well, live and learn. That Dungeons & Lasers worm model had some nice creepy little claw things that I didn't want to waste, so Gurmaw is getting a Gutmaw. This is one of the older putrid Blight Knight models, with some appropriate surgery from our good friend Dr. Jaggy. The gut bell, while rather splendid, got the old snip in order to make room for these parasite claws, which I have to say makes for an enchantingly vile torso getup. There's a lot going on in the middle of the model, so I kept the limbs simple with a bolter in his left arm and an axe borrowed from the same Blight Knight's kit on his right, pinned into a Space Marine upper arm whose heritage is lost to the mysteries of the bits box. Looks like some copper wire appeared from nowhere to cover the join, as I was obviously feeling too lazy to do it properly. Honestly, kitbashing is 90% hiding your crimes, 10% odd-tasting adhesives. With the addition of a Plague Marine head and power pack, secured to the model using one of the better-tasting chemicals, I could round out the model with another bit of disappointing thumb action, all in aid of this bit of rope. I'm going to speed through the early parts of the drugs build because honestly it's pretty much covering the same ground as a couple of the other Plague Marines, and I promised to show you how I make cables. Apologies to the regulars who very much have the spun copper t-shirt. I use 2 pieces of 0.4mm copper wire for most of the hoses I make. These are secured into the end of a drill chuck, and I let the rotary action do all of the hard work. There's a little bit of technique involved in using your thumb to keep the coils tight, but it's pretty straightforward. This produces a nice flexible cable that's a lot more resilient than green stuff, has nice fine details, and scales perfectly for 40k models. Granted, it's not much of an army yet, but it's a start. I think I'll take a look at a couple of vehicles next, trying to stray away from that well-trodden rhino with green stuff icing setup, which does work well, but I do like to make life hard for myself. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, have a wonderful Tuesday, and if it's not Tuesday, do your best.